The court session resumed on June 25, 2025, at the Pahama District Court in Finland, where the judge addressed the fourth charge against Seaman Ekpa, tax evasion, stressing its national importance due to its impact on public services like roads, schools, and hospitals. The prosecution presented evidence that Seaman Ekpa deliberately failed to declare his full income and ignored multiple warning letters, asserting that this was a deliberate tax evasion over several years, not an honest mistake. Seaman Ekpa's defense lawyer countered, saying any errors in Seaman Ekpa's tax filings were due to poor advice, confusion, and lack of proper communication, not criminal intent, while requesting the court to focus on factual evidence, not assumptions. The presiding judge allowed the prosecution to bring in its first witness, a senior tax officer from the Finnish tax administration, to provide expert testimony and help clarify complex financial aspects of the case. The witness, a senior tax auditor, explained that Seaman Ekpa's case was flagged due to discrepancies between his declared income and reports from third-party financial institutions, with deposits in Seaman Ekpa's accounts far exceeding reported earnings. The audit covered the years 2018 to 2022 and revealed undeclared income streams from freelance work, digital services, cryptocurrency, and foreign remittances, totaling an estimated $281,000, with unpaid taxes of about £72,500, excluding penalties. The auditor revealed that Seaman Ekpa had two undisclosed bank accounts, regular payments from PayPal and Wise, and failed to register his business despite active commercial activities, violations classified under Section 29 of the Finnish Tax Procedure Act as intentional tax evasion. The prosecution emphasized that Seaman Ekpa repeatedly ignored tax authorities' notices and engaged in deliberate efforts to obscure income, including cash withdrawals, the use of alias bank accounts, and income transfers designed to avoid audit trails. During cross-examination, the auditor reaffirmed that no evidence suggested a misunderstanding or accidental omission, insisting that Seaman Ekpa's actions showed a clear pattern of intentional concealment and evasion. Seaman Ekpa was accused of failing to report approximately $281,000 in income between 2018 and 2022, which the prosecution claimed led to around £72,500 in unpaid taxes, not including penalties or interest. The prosecution's witness, a tax expert, testified that Seaman Ekpa's actions met the legal definition of tax evasion under Finnish law, citing repeated failure to declare income, use of undisclosed accounts, and ignoring lawful information requests. Seaman Ekpa's defense lawyer argued that the figures presented by the prosecution were misleading, claiming that much of the so-called undeclared income came from non-taxable sources like family gifts, reimbursements, and personal loans. The defense challenged the credibility of the tax audit, pointing out that the tax authorities never met Seaman Ekpa in person, never clarified any transactions with him, and based conclusions purely on patterns, assumptions, and bank activity without proper context. Seaman Ekpa's lawyer stressed that having multiple accounts or using platforms like PayPal and Wise was not illegal, and argued that labeling such activity as criminal without verifying sources was unjust and presumptive. The defense also questioned the classification of cryptocurrency transactions, arguing that without confirmation of profit or actual gains, assuming they were taxable income was speculative. The presiding judge reminded both sides that the burden of proof rests with the prosecution, and the court must distinguish clearly between assumptions and evidence, as well as between negligence and deliberate misconduct. The prosecutor maintained that the evidence was strong, citing regular payments from online platforms and commercial activity as clear signs of intentional tax evasion over 5 years. The defense insisted that the prosecution had failed to prove intent, lacked direct evidence that Simon Ekpa knew he was violating the law, and that their entire case was built on suspicion, not certainty. The judge officially concluded the tax evasion case against Simon Ekpa on June 25, 2025, marking a significant development in his ongoing legal challenges, as attention now turns to his bail hearing and possible release from Kilmakoski Correctional Center. The court session of June 25, 2025, at the Parhama District Court in Finland began with a heavy atmosphere. The courtroom was quiet, tense, and filled with anticipation. It was a day many had been waiting for, the day when the judge would make a final pronouncement on the fourth and final charge against Simon Yoku Ekpa, the controversial figure at the center of an intense public and legal debate. The charge on the table was tax evasion. For weeks, it had loomed large over his head, threatening to damage not only his reputation, but also his freedom. Simon Yoku Ekpa, who had already been facing several legal issues in Finland, stood accused of failing to declare a significant portion of his income from the years 2018 to 2022. The prosecution had alleged that Simon Yoku Ekpa had deliberately concealed about €281,000 in earnings, which led to unpaid taxes totaling approximately €72,500. That amount did not even include the interest or penalties that could potentially be added. The case had taken a national dimension, drawing attention from both Finnish citizens and foreign observers due to Simon Yoku Ekpa's political activism and polarizing public image. From the beginning of the session, the presiding judge made it clear that tax evasion was not a minor issue. It was a serious crime, particularly because of its impact on the broader society. The judge emphasized that taxes were the foundation of public services in Finland. Roads, hospitals, schools, and social services depended on public funding. If individuals, especially those with substantial incomes, failed to pay their fair share, it threatened the entire system. The courtroom listened carefully as the judge laid out this context, setting the stage for the final phase of the hearing. As the prosecution took the floor, they came prepared with what they claimed was a thorough and conclusive set of evidence. The state prosecutor began by explaining that Simon Yoku Ekpa had received multiple warning letters from the Finnish tax administration over the years, but had ignored them. These letters, according to the prosecution, were not just reminders, but legal notifications asking Simon Yoku Ekpa to clarify discrepancies in his tax filings. The prosecutor said this repeated disregard was proof that the omissions were not innocent mistakes, but a deliberate strategy to evade taxes. To further strengthen their case, the prosecution called its main witness, a senior tax officer from the Finnish tax administration who had been directly involved in the investigation. This man was a veteran tax auditor with over 20 years of experience auditing financial records and identifying fraudulent activity. He walked into the courtroom with boxes of files, printouts, and official summaries of the audit that had been carried out on Simon Yoku Ekpa's financial life between the years 2018 and 2022. Taking the witness stand, the senior tax auditor explained that the Finnish tax administration had flagged Simon Yoku Ekpa's case when inconsistencies appeared between his declared income and information from third-party financial institutions. He said Seaman Nyoku Ekpa had consistently reported modest earnings that did not match the large deposits being made into his accounts. These deposits, in some cases, were several times higher than what had been officially declared. The auditor described how their investigation revealed at least 2 bank accounts that Seaman Nyoku Ekpa had failed to report. He also pointed out regular incoming payments from financial platforms such as PayPal and Wise, which were not mentioned in his official tax declarations. The tax officer revealed that many of these incoming funds were linked to Seaman Nyoku Ekpa's freelance digital services, online activism, cryptocurrency trades, and possibly even foreign remittances. Altogether, the audit team concluded that Seaman Nyoku Ekpa had failed to declare an estimated total of €281,000 in income over the span of 5 years. The unpaid taxes on this hidden income amounted to about €72,500. In the auditor's expert opinion, this was not a case of oversight. It was a pattern of concealment. The prosecution further supported their argument by pointing to Seaman Nyoku Ekpa's failure to register his business activities despite clearly engaging in commercial work. According to the prosecutor, Section 29 of the Finnish Tax Procedure Act considers the failure to report income and register commercial activity as intentional tax evasion, especially when accompanied by actions designed to hide the financial trail. The prosecutor accused Seaman Nyoku Ekpa of cash withdrawals done strategically to avoid electronic records, of using bank accounts not in his name, and of transferring money between accounts in ways that made auditing difficult. All these activities, the prosecutor insisted, pointed to a clear and consistent effort to stay under the radar of tax authorities. When it was time for cross-examination, the defense lawyer representing Seaman Nyoku Ekpa rose from his seat. The lawyer was calm, measured, and respectful, but clearly determined to challenge the assumptions made by the prosecution. He began by acknowledging that there were indeed discrepancies in the financial records, but insisted that they were not evidence of criminal intent. The defense said the core of the case was about intent, whether Seaman Nyoku Ekpa deliberately tried to avoid taxes, or whether he simply misunderstood the system, made errors, or received poor advice. The defense lawyer argued that many of the transactions the prosecution labeled as income were in fact personal transfers. Some were gifts from family members, others were reimbursements for expenses paid on behalf of friends or organizations, and a few were personal loans. The defense criticized the prosecution for not taking the time to investigate the sources of the funds before concluding that they were taxable income. The lawyer accused the Finnish tax administration of relying too much on digital patterns without seeking personal interviews, meetings, or clarifications with the accused. He said that Seaman Nyoku Ekpa was never invited for an in-person discussion about the findings. Instead, everything was done through emails and letters, leaving plenty of room for miscommunication and confusion. The defense also challenged the interpretation of cryptocurrency transactions, saying that without proof that the digital assets had been sold or converted into real income, it was impossible to claim tax was owed. Simply owning or moving cryptocurrency, the defense lawyer said, does not equal taxable earnings. Furthermore, the defense criticized the narrative that having multiple bank accounts or using platforms like PayPal and Wise was suspicious. In today's digital world, especially for freelancers, influencers, and content creators, it is common to use various platforms to receive payments from around the world. This, the defense insisted, does not make someone a criminal. It only shows that the person is financially active in a digital economy. At this point in the hearing, the judge intervened to remind both parties of the legal standard in such a case. The judge said it was not enough for the prosecution to raise suspicion or make accusations. They needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Simon Nyoku Ekpa intended to break the law. The judge emphasized that the court had to clearly distinguish between negligence, meaning failure to act carefully, and intentional misconduct, meaning a planned and willful action to deceive or defraud. In response, the prosecutor returned to his position. He stated that the evidence spoke for itself. According to him, Simon Nyoku Ekpa had repeated opportunities to correct his records, to explain his transactions, and to respond to official letters. But he did not. The prosecutor said this repeated silence and failure to act proved one thing: deliberate avoidance. He said Simon Nyoku Ekpa had benefited financially for years while making no attempt to fulfill his civic duty to contribute taxes to society. As the arguments came to a close, the judge took a short recess before returning with the final decision. The entire courtroom fell into complete silence as the judge began to read the ruling. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The judge announced that the court had officially closed the tax evasion case against Simon Nyoku Ekpa. The decision was not necessarily a declaration of total innocence, but it meant that based on the arguments, testimonies, and evidence presented, the court was not convinced that the case met the legal threshold required to continue prosecution under tax fraud. The judge explained that while the court acknowledged that mistakes had been made in Simon Nyoku Ekpa's tax filings, the prosecution had failed to provide strong enough evidence of criminal intent. The judge also said that while the financial records were troubling, there were enough reasonable doubts about the sources of income, the classification of certain transactions, and the failure to establish personal intent. Therefore, the court had no choice but to dismiss the charge of intentional tax evasion. As soon as the judge finished speaking, there was a loud reaction from the audience. Inside the courtroom, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's supporters, many of whom had been following the case for months, broke into applause. Some even shouted with joy. Outside the courthouse, more supporters were gathered with banners and flags, and when news of the court's decision reached them, it triggered an outburst of celebration. There were chants, songs, and tears of joy from men and women who had traveled long distances to be there. Many of them believed that Simon Nyoku Ekpa was being politically targeted, and to them, this ruling was not just a legal victory, it was a moment of justice. Simon Nyoku Ekpa himself remained calm in the courtroom. He sat quietly beside his lawyer, nodding respectfully at the judge's decision. Though he did not make a public statement immediately, those close to him said he was relieved, grateful, and hopeful. His legal team released a short message to the media outside the courthouse, thanking the Finnish judicial system for its fairness and professionalism. They also said they would continue to cooperate with any outstanding issues related to tax compliance. Although the tax evasion case had been closed, Simon Nyoku Ekpa was still not a free man. He remained in custody at the Kilmakoski Correctional Center, awaiting a separate bail hearing related to other charges against him. Still, the mood among his supporters was overwhelmingly positive. For them, the courtroom victory on June 25, 2025, was a sign that truth and fairness still had a place in the system. As the day came to a close, journalists across Finland and around the world filed their reports. Some called the ruling controversial, others praised the court for showing restraint and discipline. Legal experts debated whether the judge's reasoning would set a precedent for future tax-related cases, especially in an age where income sources are increasingly digital and global. What remained clear was that the closure of the tax evasion case had changed the mood around Simon Yoku Ekpa's broader legal battle. Whether friend or critic, everyone agreed on one thing. The outcome of that day's hearing would remain a central moment in the unfolding story of Simon Yoku Ekpa in Finland. And in that moment, for those who believed in his cause, the courtroom was not just a place of law, but a stage for victory. As the court session at the Pahamme District Court in Finland came to its dramatic conclusion on the afternoon of June 25, 2025, the feeling inside the courtroom was both electric and emotional. For many of the people who had followed Simon Yoku Ekpa's legal battles from the beginning, this moment represented more than the closing of a tax evasion case. It felt like a turning point, a moment of hope, relief, and emotional vindication, especially for those who had remained steadfast in their belief that he had been unfairly targeted. After the judge declared the tax evasion case officially closed, a brief moment of stillness filled the courtroom. It was the kind of pause that comes just before emotion spills over. The supporters of Simon Yoku Ekpa, who had been seated respectfully and quietly for hours, could no longer hold back. Smiles broke across their faces, some clasped their hands together in silent gratitude, while others burst into claps and expressions of joy. A few people, overwhelmed by the moment, began to cry. Simon Yoku Ekpa, sitting quietly with his hands folded on the defense bench, looked up at the judge as the decision was read. There was no dramatic gesture from him, no outburst of emotion. But those who watched him closely could see the subtle shift in his expression, the release of tension in his shoulders, the soft sigh of breath as though he had been holding it in for days. He turned slightly toward his lawyer, nodded, and then closed his eyes for a few seconds, almost as if he was taking a moment to absorb the gravity of what had just happened. His legal team, led by a seasoned defense attorney, known for handling complex tax and financial cases, remained composed but visibly pleased. Outside the courthouse, the mood was very different. Long before the decision had been announced, dozens of Simon Yoku Ekpa's supporters had gathered in front of the court building. Some had come with signs bearing his name and slogans calling for justice. Others came simply to show support in numbers. Many had traveled from different parts of Finland, and some even from other countries in Europe. The atmosphere outside was a mixture of tension and prayerful hope. When news broke that the judge had dismissed the tax evasion charge, a loud cheer went up. People hugged each other. Some dropped to their knees in tears, thanking God aloud. A group began to sing a traditional song, their voices rising above the hum of reporters and flashing cameras. A woman in her 60s held up a handwritten sign that read, "We stand with Simon Yoku Ekpa, justice for all Biafrans." Her voice cracked as she shouted, "This is the beginning of victory." Journalists scrambled to capture the scenes. Reporters in both English and Finnish tried to gather reactions from those outside. A man who identified himself as a Biafran activist living in Helsinki told reporters that this case was about much more than taxes. He said, "They wanted to silence him. They thought they could break him by dragging him through the courts. But today we have seen that even in a foreign land justice can still speak, can." Inside the court, once the decision was formally entered into the record, the judge addressed the court again briefly. He emphasized that his ruling did not erase the responsibility of all residents, including immigrants and dual nationals, to comply with Finnish tax laws. He made it clear that mistakes in tax filing should be corrected and transparency should always be practiced. But he also stressed that the law must be applied fairly and that suspicion alone cannot serve as the basis for conviction. It was a carefully balanced statement that acknowledged the seriousness of tax law while defending the principle of fair trial and due process. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.